Make sure it's recording. Welcome everybody to the January 2026 monthly musing for NMA. I'm excited to have Alyssa Smith join us. She'll be talking about youth volunteerism today. So take it away.
Thank you. Now I have to remember how to screen share. Oh no. Oh, there it is. It's glowing in green. That would make sense. All right, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. The thing is, the screen share is covering the, oh, there we go. I couldn't hit the present button. All right, there we go. That's better. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about youth volunteers in museums. I'm going to use the youth volunteer program at Stir Museum as an example, though we'll be talking a little bit more generally today. So I thought I would share a couple of quotes that I use with permission of some of the youth volunteers that we had there. So one of them says, "It's fun helping teach younger kids to appreciate the lives of the people who lived in the past and helping to mold them into well-rounded adults who take things with the past and learn from them." The LHA program has taught me a lot, not just about 1890s history, but also several life skills such as public speaking and teaching. Volunteering in Railroad Town is like jumping into a storybook and watching it come alive. And what I enjoy most about the LHA program, which is the Living History Apprentice program, is dressing up and living like I were in the 1890s. It gives a neat perspective that is not achieved by simply reading a history book. So just a little bit about me. I have 10 years of experience working in museums, 4.5 years running a youth volunteer program. I have a bachelor's degree in history and psychology and a master's degree in material culture and textile studies with a minor in history. I have a certified interpretive guide through the National Association for Interpretation. And outside of that, I am also a ballet and point instructor, so I might mainly work with upper elementary through high school students. So I do have a lot of experience with this age group. I'm actively involved with 4-H and sewing, and I absolutely love teaching and inspiring children. They truly are the future of all of our museums. So what can youth volunteers do? If you don't have them, you may not be thinking this way, but I do want throughout this whole presentation you to think of a couple of ways that in your site you might be able to utilize youth as volunteers. The key is adjusting the tasks to the individuals in your program. So once you have kids in that program, you're going to get a good idea of what their strengths are and what things they're interested in. And that's really important. So I have a small list here of things that they can help with potentially in your site. They can help with classes, they can assist with them, they can help either plan or set up for or help during programs and events. Keep in mind if it's an age-appropriate event for those students. They can help with living history or reenactments, office projects like painting, drawing. They can write things, they can help organize things. They can type up small papers and presentations and give them. They can help with quilt folding. A lot of museums have quilts that have not been folded. You can teach them that skill and help foster that in your institution. They can help with research. They can be on a committee that is set up of youth to specifically look at today's youth and how to keep them engaged and interested in museums. They can help with crafts, whether that's crafts that they are doing that will be used in the museum or crafting with students that come through the museum. They can help with decorating. And if you have a really skilled one, especially an older one, they might even be able to help with photography and social media posts if that is not your strength. They have a very good eye for those things, and they may have a perspective that none of us do. And that is a very small list of what they're able to do. There's so much more once you start thinking through that lens and looking at the youth that are coming into your program, and your institution. So some considerations that you should have in your institution: is there a specific dress code? Do you need them to dress in business casual? Can they dress really casual? Do they need to be wearing historical clothing to help in your site? Do you need to have a specific modern dress code to where they're all matching? Set that precedence ahead of time before you have those kids coming in, and then figure out how to either provide those clothes or accommodate that, or at least be upfront with it. Is there an age that is more appropriate for your institution? If you have material that is a lot more mature, if your site is not necessarily as child friendly as some, you may need to have older youth as opposed to the younger ones. If you work with youth a lot, if you are a children's museum, if you are a history museum that shares history of all places, all ages, you may have a lot broader category of age that you can do. At Stewart, we had children between the ages of 11 and 17 in that program, and that was pretty feasible for us, but that may not be feasible everywhere. So you really do need to look at what you're doing. Is there a cost to be in your program? There was a cost at Stewart, and so we had a scholarship that was formed to help cover that cost if there were any families that could not afford it. You may not have a cost. You may have a much smaller program, just having some kids come in as volunteers. And if you do not have that, you don't necessarily need to consider it, but at some point you may need to consider there being a cost to the program, depending on what you're having to put into it. A very key consideration, in my opinion, is training. Whether that youth volunteer is in a formal youth volunteer program, such as the Living History Apprentice program at Stewart, or if it's just coming in and working, 2 hours here and there and getting some volunteer time for National Honor Society or for 4-H, you do need to make sure that they are trained to do whatever it is you're having them do. We can't have expectations that they're not aware of. So if you want them to know how to do something right, walk them through it, show them, make sure they're comfortable with it, make sure they know how to do it. And usually if you go through those steps, they can do a really good job. But it is important that we train them and train them to their level. We also need to make sure that they have access to any materials or research that they're going to need to succeed at the tasks they're doing. So if you have children who are helping with an activity, make sure they have everything for that activity. A lot of kids, you're going to notice that once they're really bought in, once they're engaged in it, they want to know more. They want to be able to answer those questions when the visitors come through. They don't want to just know, oh, this is a quilt. This quilt was owned by this person. They want to be able to talk about the history of that quilt. Where was it from? Who had it? Why would you have it? And you're going to see that about a lot of objects and a lot of history. And so as those kids start to learn it, give them access to more history about those objects, those people, that exhibit, that class, whatever it is that you're having them help with, so that they have the ability to expand on it, learn more, and do more with it. That really does help. I've found that for most of the kids, they don't just want that base level of knowledge. They feel a lot more bought in and like the task they're doing is important when they have more that they can learn and share. It's also important to advertise that you have a youth volunteer program, whether it is formal or informal. It's a lot easier if you have a super formal program to say, hey, we are now accepting applications. We, have this program. Look what our youth volunteers are doing. But even on a smaller scale, if you are just willing to have a couple youth volunteers here and there, but you're looking to have them, if you're not getting that information out there, they're not going to come. So you really need to make sure that you are sharing that on your website, on your social media, or even word of mouth, going around and saying, hey, you have youth, you have this age group. Do you think those kids would be interested in coming and volunteering with us and participating in this project, this event, this class, whatever it is? The more you can get the word out there, the more odds you're going to have of those students coming, participating, and helping that program grow. And it is also really important to consider your site. What it's like at my site is not going to be the same as it is at your site. No two museums are going to be identical in this, so what is your site set up to handle? Not every museum is a science museum or a children's museum, living history museum. You have to look at your site. Are there safe spaces for those children to work together on these projects? Do they need more hands-on. Can you watch them from where you're at? Can they be observed by other staff or volunteers when they're in this space? How public facing are they when they're helping with this class or this event? Do you have the staffing to make sure those kids are safe, engaged, on task, and trained? All of that's going to determine how many kids you can have in your program, what amount of time you can have them there for, and what you can have them doing. So just because it works for one place doesn't mean it'll work cookie cutter, copy and paste for yours. At Stir Museum, we had the kids help with a lot of things. So they helped with classes, events, living history. They came in and helped with painting, office projects, crafts, a little bit of everything. But with that, we had pretty high expectations of what they were doing. It was a very formal program. So all of the students had to go through a formal application and interview process. So they applied. Once they had that, it was accepted. They came in for an interview. They had to dress professionally for this interview. And these interviews were done by staff at the museum as well as current students in the program. So not only did that help the current students in the program kind of buy into a mentorship with these incoming students, but it also showed them how to be an interviewer, how to be a part of an interview. And it made the incoming kids a little less nervous seeing a peer as opposed to just adults. And that was really beneficial to all of them. We had a mandatory training. They could not be a youth volunteer without attending training. I do think that this is critical because I do believe very much that without giving proper training, they are set up to fail in a way. There's a lot we can do and that these students can do and do very, very well if we give them the training that they need to be successful. It's going to be a little different than when you have adult volunteers, and that's why we really have to make sure we put that time into training them. We did add a 10-hour volunteer minimum per year, and we did that just so that students couldn't say, hey, I've been, a youth volunteer at this site for this many years, and they were only active in that site for one of those years. It may not be a problem you encounter at your sites, especially if it's not a formal program, but we were reaching the point where we had a lot more interest than spots that we had, and so that was added in so that those spaces could be freed up for students who really wanted to be there. It's also very important to me that any youth in a youth volunteer program, formal or informal, are actively learning and seeking to improve. I don't expect them to come in with all the knowledge. I don't even expect them to come in knowing exactly what they want to do or what they'll be good at. But I do expect that when they come in, they are actively learning. They are asking questions. They want to get better. They want to know more. They want to be a part of it, and they want to see how they can be a part of it. And those are the kids who you can mold and teach the most. And they will end up being the biggest inspirations to the staff and the volunteers at that site and those visitors. So that really is a key piece to it. And that is something we are able to foster. Once again, goes back to dress code for us. At Stewart, we did have a modern dress code as well as a historical dress code. That's just because the amount of things that they were a part of, we needed them to be visible at all times to us. I needed to know when I looked across the room exactly who was a youth volunteer and who was a youth who was there for a class or a staff member or a visitor. And so that was kind of a piece of it. We had a dress code that allowed us to easily identify them, which helps us keep them safe, but also helps them know that they are constantly representing that program and that institution in what they're doing. And so that is something to consider in your sites. And most importantly of all of these, behavior reflects the program expectations. So with any of our youth volunteers, we always went through and sat down and said, hey, here are the expectations of this program, your behavior, your dress code, your attendance, whatever that is. And I want that behavior to reflect that in order for that student to come back the next year or continue in the program. And that's something that if you give them upfront, most of them are going to be very good about. And if not, you can talk to their families or you can work through that. But usually a kid, especially in a formal program, if they really want to be there, they're going to show up and they're going to do a really good job. And one thing I've learned with working with youth, both at museums and outside of museums, is that most often the youth are very willing to learn, but sometimes they're just afraid to admit that they didn't already know how to do a task. This task can be as simple as sweeping. You would be surprised how few kids actually sweep, know that skill, and can do it well. You hand them a broom and they're like, well, I mean, I guess I know how to do this. And they might try, or they might seem like they don't care and don't want to try. And usually, if you break past that barrier and you just show them how to do it, they have no problem with it. They go around doing it all the time. And usually later they open up and they say, I actually didn't know. I've never done that before, which may seem kind of shocking to some of us. But some of these basic skills, they're just not having to use. And so never assume that they know how to do a task. Just go ahead and show them as though they don't. Never treating them like it's silly for them not knowing already, but making sure that they're equipped with the tools they need to do it the way you want it, as though they've never had to do it before. And that really does make a big difference because they no longer feel silly asking those questions because you were so willing to show them the last time and you didn't treat them like they were silly for not knowing. And that's going to open them up to asking questions and doing more and doing better later. So when we look at the Living History Apprentice program at Stewart, I took the 2022 and 2024 data just as an example. So we had 38 youth volunteers in 2022. They worked a total of 1,816.25 hours. And 2 years later, by 2024, we had 62 youth volunteers, which worked 3,194.8 hours. At that point, the national value of the volunteer hour was $33.49 an hour, which is quite a bit, and that does matter for grant funding and pieces like that, so that is just something important to kind of file away in your pocket. But in 2024, the Nebraska minimum wage was $13.50. So if we take the 2024 volunteer hours, multiply them by the minimum wage, if we had to pay the cost of their time for staff, that would have been $43,120.08. I don't know about your institutions. Maybe you are just swimming in money and you have all of that to fund every program and all of the staffing you need. But we could not have done to the success level that we did some of the programs and classes without those kids. They were invaluable. Putting that price tag on them, we couldn't have afforded it, but at the same time, we couldn't have done it without them. And so they can really be a key player in it, and they can really make a difference in all of our institutions when we're using them to their fullest in ways that they thrive and can succeed. So I'm sure you knew we'd come back to it, but training is really, really important. These kids love to learn. They love to do new things. They love to be useful and feel important. So something to always keep in mind is they are minors. Unless you're using adult volunteers, they are minors. There are different expectations. There are different safety things we have to keep in mind. We may have different protocols. We may have tasks that they cannot do because they are minors, or tasks that they cannot do alone. But that is something that as you do it, you can kind of figure it out, gauge it, gauge the safety, gauge the task, gauge those kids, their maturity level, to figure out what they're doing and what training you're giving them to fill the gaps so that they can participate to the level that they want. And they do not all have the same strengths. If I was asked as a youth to do a social media post, I would have been absolutely lost. But if I was asked to sew something, I could have done that. Public speaking, no problem. I know children who would have been absolute petrified to give a speech. So when you get to know the actual individual children in that program and not just your needs, you will realize that they have so much more to give and so many ideas, and they are so bought in when they feel that they are connected to those tasks and not just doing busy work. And honestly, when you're able to give them some things that fit their strengths, they're more willing to try some things that are in their weaknesses or aren't their interest because they want to still help and they want to grow and they see that they can get there. So it is beneficial to kind of individualize your programs. And it's also really important to model the behavior you expect. You are the biggest example as well as any of your staff or volunteers who are working directly with your youth volunteers. If you want them to have a positive attitude about something and show up, you have to model it. If you want them to sweep a certain way, fold a quilt a certain way, to teach a certain way, to show up and help with these tasks in this order, you have to model it. Don't assume that they already know how. Don't assume that they can read your mind, but show them how to do it. And I very firmly believe that they are our future. It is our responsibility to teach them how to care. And the reason why I think of it that way is if we think of our generations, if we think of the next generations, if we think of the generations to come after that, who is it that brings their children to the museums? Who decides whether state and federal funding goes to the museums? Who decides whether they themselves are going to visit a museum, if they're going to donate to a museum? Who decides if museums are important enough that it is a career choice that they want to be a part of? It's those students, it's the kids. And if no one else is showing them how to care about museums, why they should care about museums, who will? And who is the best at doing that? Those who work in them. The people who are passionate about and love museums are the best people to teach that generation how to care about them. And the best way I've found to do that is to get them involved. You can inspire a kid through a class. You can inspire them through an event and a program. You can certainly inspire them through an exhibit. But getting them hands-on involved in sharing history, participating in history, experiencing history, they will never forget that. They will talk about that because that's an experience for them. And that is why it's our responsibility. I don't know a single museum who doesn't have a responsibility to teaching and sharing history. And if you get those kids involved and you let them be a part of it, it's game changing. And I don't know if you've ever been around a youth volunteer and heard them talking about history, but they have a way of getting the youth younger than them really roped in and bought in and listening and part of it and asking questions and bridging that gap. And so it is really important to keep them involved in that way and to see them not so much as, oh, we've got to have something for the youth to do, or, oh, it's just another thing to check off on the list. No, they are the future. And when you start thinking about that, rephrasing and reframing that, it really does open it up. And those kids see it. They see how you feel about them. They see if you treat them like something as a chore or exasperating, or if you're tired of them. But they also feel it when you believe in them and you want them there and you're showing them that you care and that you care about their ideas of that space and what they bring and appreciate them. And you may not know the impact that your museum has, will have, or has already had. I don't know if any of you recognize the little girl in this picture, but that is me when I was younger. And my family traveled to a lot of museums, and I absolutely loved it. I went to these museums and they opened my eyes for what history was. To me, previously, history had just been dates on a page. It had been a thing that happened, but it felt like the distant future, not future, the distant past. It didn't feel close. The human reality was removed. But when I got to go and engage with history in these spaces, whether it was a class or a tour or a hands-on experience, a staff member who said, "Hey, you seem to be interested in this piece. Can I tell you more?" Those are the pieces that made history tangible, that made it a reality and helped me to see that these were real things that happened to real people. And the past was not so far away. It was a lot closer than it seemed in the books and in history class. And so you really don't know. Going to museums as a kid inspired me to work in museums as an adult. I am doing what I do today because of people who worked in museums before me. So something to always keep in mind. And don't forget to have time for fun. So the youth really want their volunteer time to be useful and needed. It does not mean that they cannot do busy work, but they do not want to feel like all they are doing is busy work. It is also important to note that they do need rewards in a different way. So developmentally, their brains do not self-motivate in the same way that adults' brains do. So in youth volunteer programs, we need to seek to assist them with their intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So what does that mean? Extrinsic motivation is things that come from outside of ourselves, which is something that most children need. That can be a reward, that can be a party, that can be one of their peers saying, "You just did that, how cool." Intrinsic motivation, which is what a lot of adults thrive on, is that motivation from within. That's saying, "I'm going to do this because I want to do this. I'm able to do this." It's that motivation that comes from within us that tells us, we can do this, we want to do this, we're doing this for ourselves. For those kids, their reward centers are not fine-tuned yet, and giving them a thank you or a pat on the back may not be enough. So kind of thinking through things that you can do to give that back to them and help them is going to help with that motivation and that willingness to show up time and time again and work on those projects. At Stewart Museum, we had a tiered hours system, so they had different prizes that they could reach at different levels of volunteer time. And that was very motivational to them. Sometimes it was a party, like a pizza party or a themed party. Sometimes we played games, or I know one year they did a scavenger hunt. So it didn't always have to be a big, extravagant, or expensive thing. We also found our youth volunteers really liked buttons, like the pin back buttons. That was a prize that they were willing to do an awful lot for. They worked on a project for hours or showed up to a bunch of things because they wanted to get that button. They wanted to be part of that club, that group, that project. So figuring out what motivates the kids in your program really makes a difference. They might be candy motivated. It might be that you just have to have, a box of candy, and then when they do a really good job and they all show up at the completion of a project, everyone gets a piece of candy. But something to tell them, hey, we saw what you were doing, we saw how hard you worked, and we really appreciate that, goes a long way. And, it's really important too that we are fostering a place that the youth want to come and learn. We want them to buy into the importance of sharing and preserving history. We have to get them through that door and we have to keep them coming back. And so, for adults, we see the value of our time and we can check the boxes and we can see it. But for the youth, that's not going to always be the same. And truthfully, we gain a lot from those kids, and it's important that we give them back something in return. We can't necessarily pay every single one of them to work full time or even part time in our museums, but when we can show them that their work makes a difference, more so than them just seeing it themselves, it helps. And with that, I want you to think through some things that you could use youth volunteers for at your museum. And more importantly, is there something you're already doing that you could do more with? Is there a program that you could maybe create or adjust that would use them? Is there something that you're doing that you don't need to do, but maybe the youth could get involved in? These are the things to be thinking through as you're planning a youth volunteer program, because I believe you all should, or to adjust the youth volunteer program that you may already have. And it will take time to grow. You're not going to instantaneously have a thriving youth volunteer program, but the more you put into it, the more you talk about it, the more you're able to get that information out there, the better chances you will have of having a successful youth volunteer program at your institution. And with that, does anyone have any questions? If you do have a question that comes up later, I did put my email below so you can reach out to me. Feel free to reach out if you have a question about youth volunteers or maybe want to talk through some ideas for youth volunteer programs at your institution. I'm very happy to talk about it and help with that. I would love to see youth more involved across the state of Nebraska. I do think that they are a very, very important resource, and they are our future. So, any questions from anyone?
Hey, Alyssa, thank you. This is Linda Buck, and I'm in McCook. And I had a student come in. Actually, her aunt came in and signed her up. She's 16 and she's driving now. She has her driver's license, and her insurance company is giving her a discount if she does 40 hours of volunteer work. And so I had her come in for the first time this week, and I had her do a scavenger hunt because we always have a kids activity. And I figured scavenger hunt would be easier for her to do than for me because she's closer to the kid's age. But I, she's coming back, and I'm thinking, I'm not exactly sure what I need to have her do or what I want to have her do. I don't want her to have to dust or any of that stuff. I want it to be meaningful to her, something that she will enjoy doing. But along those lines, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should reach out to our insurance agents in town and let them know that the museum would be a place for their students to volunteer if they wanted to get a discount. Any suggestions on that?
On tasks or getting the information out there?
Both.
As
Please.
far as getting the information out there, we have had a lot of kids over the years. I know a lot of 4-Hers need extra volunteer hours, so you can reach out to if you have a local 4-H group. Um, a lot of the schools have National Honor Society. Those kids have to have extra hours. I'm gonna guess FFA also does. I can't guarantee that, but there's a lot of groups where those kids need them. If you have homeschool groups, those end up being some very good, you know, pools for volunteers because a lot of the times those parents are looking for activities for those kids to be involved in and learn some of those additional skills. So those are some groups if you're wanting to reach out and say, hey, we have this program. We would like to have people come and do this. Before you go and have too many things, though, and too many people coming back to you, make sure you have things that they can be a part of. Now, for your student, if she really enjoyed creating that scavenger hunt, maybe she can create a craft that they can do at the end that maybe they take home if they successfully complete it. Or, something that has your museum's logo or name and a task that connects back to your space. If you're going to send something away, let it be free advertising. Let it, connect people back. Kids tend to be kind of good at creating activities. And, then don't be afraid at the end of their project when they've been working on it to sit down with them and say, these pieces I really like. Maybe we can tweak this together. Maybe we can adjust this piece to it. I don't know if your group uses Canva or anything like that. A lot of the kids can figure it out very easily, and museums have access to that a lot, either free or less expensive. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's free, but that's something you can get, especially a 16 or 17-year-old. You could put them in on that and have them working on pieces that maybe look a little cooler than just, a Word document can get, and let them be a part of designing it. I don't know what you do for programs or projects or events at your site, but those are things that kids can be involved in or very well may have ideas about. And, sometimes that's helpful, even just getting their feedback on some of those. And so those are all ways you can kind of think through it. And it doesn't hurt either to sit down with that kid and say, hey, what are you good at? What do you enjoy? What do you think you might want to do now that you've helped with this task and you've seen our space? Is there something that you would be interested in helping with? Because they might have video editing skills that you've never heard of, that you didn't know about, or they might have experience, giving presentations or working with children's programs. You don't know. And once you get to know that individual, you can kind of put it back towards them and kind of adjust it. But we almost always had projects that we had kind of on our list of, here's some upcoming events, here's some things that need cut out, some not so interesting projects, but things that could be helped with in between. So if they ran out of time on their task, if they needed something else to do, if they needed a brain break from it, well, here's a bucket of things that we can work on that are more of our busy work projects, but something we can pull in a pinch if you showed up and we weren't prepared for it, or if we needed a few minutes with a visitor that, buys some of that time. If that kid is really good at speaking with visitors, maybe you have them go through and help create a tour or a tour for kids. Kind of adjust things accordingly in that way, have them learn how to do that task. So when you're talking about a 15, 16, 17-year-old, you have a lot more skill-based tasks that they may be able to participate in.
Thank you. That's very helpful with the ideas.
Any other questions? I will say too, just more generally, it really does help to go into having youth volunteers with an idea of what you might want from them. So, if you have classes or field trips that come through, can a youth volunteer help with that? If so, to what extent can they help? Are they just assisting someone? Can they help with planning one? They may not be able to be liability-wise the primary person on it, but there's a lot they can do to help. That might allow you to have a little bit larger group. Can they be a part of maybe a preschool or toddler program? Or can they be a part of maybe a program where you have some of the retired folks from one of the retirement homes come in? They always love children. Can you use them as a connection point with that group? Who do you have around? Who's coming to your museum? Maybe what gaps do you have in the visitors at your museum that those youth might be able to connect with? So there's a lot of ways to kind of think through it, but to your benefit, it helps a lot if you have an idea before the kids are coming of what things you would like to have them help with. Because if they all of a sudden show up and you're like, I don't have anything for you, I don't know, they're going to get bored very fast. And they're not going to see it as important and an important use of their time. And that's one of the things I saw the most when I was running the program, but also just working with youth prior to that and outside of museums, is they really need to feel that what they're doing actually matters. If they spend all the time, they get out of school, they work all day, now all of a sudden they're being given busy work and they don't have any clue what it's used for, or how it's used, or why it even matters, they're not going to want to come back. Their time is valuable. Our time is valuable. Their time is valuable. And if they feel like you don't have a plan, they will see that and they will know. So the more you can have that plan ahead of time, the better. But there's nothing wrong with sitting down with a volunteer, especially one that, when you're first getting started, or one that really is passionate about it, and saying, what are your skills? What would you want to do? They may have ideas that you hadn't even thought about that they're good at. This past year, I had a girl who, she had incredible skills with calligraphy. I do not have any skills with calligraphy. She redid a whole bunch of signs for us using calligraphy, just freehanding it out of her mind because she just had that ability. Well, if we had not had those conversations with that student, we would not have known that. And I've had students help with sewing projects or painting who have incredible skills. And if I had not given them the chance to show me what they were good at, they very well may have been doing a task that wasn't helpful to them. And a handful of years ago, there were a couple of girls I worked with at the museum who had become staff, but both of them had previously been youth volunteers. These two sisters, very sweet, could not have been more dissimilar in their interests. If you had had the one sister and bottled her in and said, hey, all you can help with is the summer classes. She enjoyed a summer class here and there, but she did not thrive on summer classes. She loved being a part of living history. Her sister, on the other hand, absolutely incredible with the kids. She could have spent every day, all day, helping with classes. Being in the heat, having to just talk to people without the kids, not her thing at all. they both absolutely thrived in their category. If they had been told, this is the only thing you can do because this is what the volunteers do, one or both of them would have walked away. And so that's where I kind of always had the perspective I had coming into it because I had known them 10 years ago. And I saw that firsthand from people who at that point were old enough to communicate it and say, yeah, this was my experience and here's why. So that can also make a difference. And, you know, one thing that we implemented that I recommend a lot of places do is survey the kids. When you have enough kids, when they're aging out of your program or when they're being hired or moving or each year, depending on how many people you have, don't be afraid to send them a survey and say, hey, what do you like? What do you dislike? What do you think we could do better? What would you like to see changed? What was most helpful, or what thing do you feel like would have set you up for success better? We asked those kids before we took the program over, we asked them throughout it. And that's something that's going to change as different kids come in through your programs. And so it may not be the same each year. You're going to have to adjust to those kids because the kids that were coming through 10 years or 5 years ago aren't the same kids coming through now. And that is an important thing to kind of consider through any program. And that's part of why I say it's not going to be able to be a cookie cutter version. You have to adjust it to your kids and your site, and you'll know. You'll know if something's really not working. Those kids won't want to be there. They won't return. They're not going to finish their hours. They're not going to have a good attitude about it. But when you're doing it right and you found the thing for those kids, they're going to come in and say, Miss Linda, did you know? Did you know we could do this? Did you see this? What if we did this? And sometimes those ideas might be completely off the charts. You're like, that's not going to work, but I like the idea. So maybe let's look at this instead. But sometimes they end up with those ideas and you go through the what if. What if we did do that? Maybe we could. Maybe we can incorporate it in some way and you end up better for it. So don't be afraid to kind of follow through the what if they do give an idea, even if at first your instinct is, oh no, how are we going to do that? We can't afford that. We don't have the staffing for that. We don't have the people for that. Just pause, tell them you'll think about it, and then get back to them. And sometimes that really matters to them as well. And this I know from the kids themselves. So, any other questions? All right. Well, if you do end up with any questions, you're of course more than welcome to send me an email. I'm happy to answer them. I love talking about youth volunteers and getting them involved in museums. It is a highlight of my day, so I don't mind. Happy to give out free and unsolicited advice regarding how to build your programs. They really are the future of our museums, and like I said, that's how I think we need to think of them and consider it and their time, because if we frame it that way in our minds, we're going to have a much more successful museum and program that we're building for those kids.
Well, thank you, Alyssa. I really appreciate your time today and your insights into youth volunteerism. I learned a few things. Alyssa will also be talking in February about textile storage and displays. She's multi-talented, so we're excited to hear about that. And then in March, we'll be doing our conference preview. So if you want to learn more about our conference, check out the March ones. We do still have a few openings in July, September, October, and November. So if anybody has suggestions or would like to do a program, a monthly musing session, or even just lead a discussion, contact me and we'll get you all set up. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you stopping by today. And I promise next month we will have the link fixed but thank you. Thank you for coming in today.